Was I heard from people who were very, very much involved 20-odd years ago, more than 20 years ago, in resurrecting Camilla. Their job was to take her from the mistress in 1996 and get her to be queen.
February 11th, 2026, 8:17 p.m, Clarence House, London. King Charles III sits in his private study reviewing what should be routine estate documentation forwarded from the Privy Purse Office, just standard post-probate paperwork related to his mother's will, property transfers, asset allocations, the kind of administrative detail that comes with settling a monarch's estate. But as he turns to page 7 of the Highland Properties assessment, his hands stop moving. His reading glasses slip slightly down his nose, and for a moment that staff members later describe as unsettling, the King of England sits in complete frozen silence. Because their informal legal language is a property transfer he knew absolutely nothing about. A section of Balmoral, 187 acres of forested glen, moorland and gardens that he'd assumed remained part of the main estate, has been permanently bequeathed to someone outside the direct line of succession. Not to him, not to William, not held in trust. George. To Lady Louise Windsor, his niece, a 22-year-old with no formal royal title, no working royal status, and until this moment, virtually no public profile whatsoever. The document is dated September 2017, sealed by Queen Elizabeth II and countersigned by Prince Philip. A joint private will provision that was executed years before either of them died, but kept completely confidential until the final legal formalities were completed. Charles reads the description of the property. Little Balmoral Manor, formerly the West Enclosure, estimated value £24 million, including one restored Edwardian hunting lodge, 2 archival cabins, 1 private family chapel, associated outbuildings, and full mineral and water rights. His first thought, according to sources who spoke with him hours later, is that this must be an error, some kind of administrative confusion. Surely his mother wouldn't have made a decision this significant without discussing it with him. Surely he would have been consulted about carving up Balmoral, the place his mother loved most in the world. But then he sees the additional notation at the bottom of the transfer document. Executed with full knowledge and consent of H.M. the Queen, countersigned by H.R.H. the Princess Royal as executor of private estate affairs, non-negotiable and irrevocable. Princess Anne knew. His sister knew about this for potentially years and never told him. Charles, according to a palace source who was present in an adjacent room, does something he rarely does in private. He raises his voice. When was I going to be informed of this? The question is directed at no one in particular because he's alone. But the anger in his voice, the hurt, the genuine devastation of discovering that his mother had made a major legacy decision without his knowledge, echoes through Clarence House loudly enough that staff 3 rooms away pause in their work. Within the hour, Charles would demand an emergency meeting with Princess Anne. Within 3 hours, Camilla would discover what had happened, and within 6 hours, her son, Tom Parker Bowles, would be making phone calls to family lawyers, using words like contest and procedural review and undue influence. Because this wasn't just about Charles being kept in the dark. This was about Camilla losing something she'd been planning to claim for years. Something she'd built an entire strategic initiative around, something she'd promised to her family, her charitable foundation and her network of supporters. Little Balmoral Manor, the one piece of Queen Elizabeth's legacy that Camilla had been absolutely certain would become hers to control. And now it was gone. Given to a young woman Camilla had barely paid attention to. A quiet, bookish royal who'd never competed for headlines or jockeyed for position. And that, more than anything else, made the loss completely unbearable. Now, before we go any further, I need to be absolutely clear about something. What I'm about to tell you is based on leaked estate documents, insider testimonies from people who were present during key conversations, sources close to multiple royal households, and legal filings that have been verified by multiple independent parties. The core facts: that Lady Louise Windsor inherited Little Balmoral Manor, that it was valued at approximately £24 million. That it was sealed in a joint will by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip in 2017. These are confirmed and documented. But the personal reactions, the family confrontations, the behind-the-scenes strategic planning by Camilla's team, and the specific conversations that took place when this inheritance became known, these are based on insider accounts that cannot be independently verified in every detail. If even half of what's being reported is accurate, we're not just talking about a property inheritance. We're talking about Queen Elizabeth II making a deliberate choice to bypass her own son and his wife in favour of a granddaughter who represented everything the Queen valued: quiet service, personal character, and duty without spectacle. And that choice, made years before her death and kept secret until it was legally irreversible, has exposed fault lines in the royal family that may never fully heal. So let's start from the beginning, because this story doesn't start in February 2026 when Charles discovered the inheritance. It starts 3 years earlier in 2023 when Queen Camilla began quietly building a plan to expand her influence into Scottish territory. November 2023, Clarence House. According to sources familiar with the planning, Queen Camilla convened a small strategy meeting with her private office staff and representatives from the Crown Literary Circle, her charitable foundation. The topic: establishing a Scottish cultural presence that would solidify her legacy beyond England and Wales. The problem, as her team saw it, was straightforward. Camilla had successfully rehabilitated her public image in England through decades of carefully managed charitable work, literary patronage, and strategic public appearances. She'd transformed from the most hated woman in Britain to the Queen Consort, accepted if not universally beloved. But in Scotland, her reception remained cooler. The Scottish public had adored Queen Elizabeth II, who spent every summer at Balmoral and was seen as having a genuine connection to Highland culture and tradition. Camilla had tried to build similar associations, but it never quite landed the same way. So her team proposed something ambitious: a Scottish writers' heritage retreat, a place where authors, poets and scholars could come to work in an environment steeped in royal history, somewhere beautiful, symbolic and connected to literary tradition. And the perfect location in Camilla's mind was obvious: the underutilised western portion of the Balmoral's estate, the area known internally as the West Enclosure. According to sources who've seen portions of the planning documents, Camilla's team began mapping out exactly what this retreat would look like. The Edwardian hunting lodge would be converted into writers' studios. The archival cabins would become guest quarters. The private chapel would host poetry readings and cultural events. It was, on paper, an elegant plan, turning a neglected piece of royal property into a vibrant cultural hub that would cement Camilla's legacy as a patron of the arts, particularly in a region where she needed stronger symbolic presence. But there was one significant problem with this plan. Camilla didn't own the West Enclosure, the Queen did, and Camilla was assuming that after Elizabeth's death, the property would either remain unused or be available for reallocation to whatever initiatives seemed appropriate. That assumption, as it turned out, was catastrophically wrong, because while Camilla was drafting architectural surveys and coordinating with her charitable donors, Queen Elizabeth II was executing a completely different plan, one that had been in motion since 2017 and involved a young woman Camilla had never considered a threat. September 2017, Balmoral Castle. According to sources close to the late Queen, this was the month that changed everything. Prince Philip had just retired from public duties. Queen Elizabeth was 91 years old and increasingly aware of her own mortality. And she was making decisions about her legacy, not the public, institutional legacy of her reign, but the private, personal legacy of what she valued most. Balmoral had always been that place for her, not the public-facing monarchy of Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, but the private retreat where she could remember who she was beneath the crown. And the West Enclosure, which she privately called Little Balmoral, represented the soul of that retreat. It was where she went to truly be alone, where she walked without security hovering, where she sat in the small chapel and prayed without ceremony, where she could breathe. According to former staff members, the Queen made a decision that September Little Balmoral would not become part of the Crown estate after her death. It would not be absorbed into institutional property management. It would not be available for charitable initiatives or public programs. Instead, it would be given to someone she trusted to protect it, someone who understood what it meant, someone who would guard it not as a trophy, but as a sanctuary. And the person she chose was Lady Louise Windsor. Why Louise? According to multiple sources who are close to the Queen in her final years, the answer is simple. Louise reminded Elizabeth of herself. Quiet, dutiful, uncomfortable with attention, deeply committed to family but uninterested in the spotlight. Someone who understood that real service doesn't require a stage. The Queen had watched Louise grow up. She'd seen how the young woman handled the pressures of being royal without seeking the perks. How she'd chosen to attend university like a normal student rather than trade on her royal status. How she'd volunteered with charities without demanding credit or publicity. And most importantly, the Queen had seen how Louise reacted to Balmoral itself. During family visits, Louise didn't treat it like a vacation property. She treated it like hallowed ground. She walked the trails with reverence. She asked questions about the history. She seemed to genuinely understand what the place meant. So in September 2017, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip executed a sealed codicil to their private wills, a legal provision that separated Little Balmoral from the main estate, placed it in a Highland trusteeship fund originally established by the Queen Mother, and designated Lady Louise Windsor as the sole beneficiary upon both their deaths. The provision included one critical condition: Louise must demonstrate quiet service, personal character, and no claim to throne or title beyond her birth. In other words, she could never use this inheritance as a platform for personal ambition. It was a trust, not a prize. Princess Anne was named executor of this provision. She would ensure the transfer happened properly and that Louise understood the weight of what she was receiving. But critically, King Charles was not informed. According to sources, the Queen made a deliberate choice not to tell her son about this decision because she feared he would either try to talk her out of it or would inadvertently mention it to Camilla. And the Queen, these sources say, did not want Camilla anywhere near Little Balmoral. Fast forward to 2025, Queen Elizabeth has been dead for over 2 years. The formal probate process for her estate is finally nearing completion, and the sealed codicil is about to be executed. But nobody outside the very small circle of executors, Princess Anne, the Queen's private solicitors, and Louise's parents, knows about it yet, including King Charles, and including Queen Camilla, who is now deep into planning her Scottish Writers' Heritage retreat. December 2025, Parker Bowles family estate, Gloucestershire. According to sources, Camilla hosted a private dinner for key members of her extended family and close advisors. The purpose? To celebrate the impending launch of the retreat initiative and coordinate family support for the project. Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son from her first marriage, was present. So was her daughter, Laura Lopes. Both had been briefed extensively on the retreat plan and understood its importance to their mother's legacy. During the dinner, according to someone who was present, Camilla spoke openly about her vision. She described how the retreat would transform the unused West Enclosure into a vibrant cultural centre, how it would finally give her a meaningful presence in Scotland, how it would create a legacy that extended beyond her role as Charles's wife. "This will be mine," she reportedly said. "My contribution, my mark." Tom Parker Bowles, according to this source, raised his glass in a toast to the future of Little Balmoral. The irony of that toast, given what was about to happen, is almost painful. Because at that exact moment, approximately 400 miles north in Aberdeenshire, Lady Louise Windsor was making one of her quiet Thursday afternoon visits to the West Enclosure, accompanied by a single protection officer and 2 archivists who were helping her understand exactly what she was about to inherit. Louise had known since early 2023 that the Queen had left her something significant. Her parents had told her that there would be an inheritance, that it was important, and that she would need to prepare for the responsibility it entailed. But she didn't know the full scope until the autumn of 2025, when Princess Anne sat her down and explained exactly what was coming. According to sources close to the Wessex family, Louise's initial reaction was not excitement, it was anxiety bordering on fear. She didn't want a £24 note, million property. She didn't want that kind of responsibility. She didn't want to be thrust into a position that would inevitably draw media attention and public scrutiny. But Anne, according to these sources, was firm. Your grandmother didn't give you a gift, she gave you a duty, and you don't get to refuse it just because it's difficult. So Louise began preparing. She visited the property regularly. She met with the staff who maintained it. She reviewed the archival documents stored in the cabins. She learnt the history of every building, every trail, every stone. She was, in essence, proving that she deserved what she was about to receive, not because of her bloodline, but because of her character. And all of this was happening in complete secrecy. The staff who saw her there were bound by confidentiality agreements. The local residents who occasionally spotted her didn't realise who she was. And certainly nobody in Camilla's orbit had any idea that the property they were planning to claim was already spoken for. January 2026, the collision course was set. Camilla's team submitted formal zoning applications for the West Enclosure. They filed preliminary proposals with the Balmoral Estate Management Office. They coordinated with architectural firms about renovation timelines, and every single one of those submissions was quietly noted by Princess Anne's office and set aside without response, because by January 2026, the legal transfer was days away from completion, the land registry documents were being finalised, the trusteeship fund was being activated, and Louise was about to become the legal owner of Little Balmoral Manor. February 8th, 2026, the public announcement was made. It wasn't ceremonial. There was no press conference, no photographs of Louise holding deed documents, just a brief official statement from Buckingham Palace confirming that in accordance with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip's private wills, a portion of the Balmoral estate, known as Little Balmoral Manor, had been bequeathed to Lady Louise Windsor. The statement emphasised that this was a private family matter, that the property had been legally separated from the Crown estate, and that it reflected the late Queen's personal wishes. For about 6 hours, the news percolated through media channels as an interesting but relatively minor royal story. A young royal inheriting a property. Not exactly earth-shattering, but then people started doing the math. £24 million. 187 acres. Prime Highland property. Archival materials, a private chapel that Queen Elizabeth herself had used. This wasn't a minor bequest. This was a major inheritance, one of the most valuable and symbolically significant pieces of the Queen's personal property. And it had been given to a 22-year-old with virtually no public profile, bypassing the direct line of succession entirely. The media response shifted from mild interest to intense curiosity within hours. But the media response was nothing compared to what was happening inside Clarence House. February 8th, 2026, approximately 3 p.m. Queen Camilla's private secretary received the public announcement and immediately recognised the property description, the West Enclosure, the exact location of the proposed Writers' Heritage Retreat. The secretary rushed to inform Camilla, who was in the middle of a charity meeting. According to sources who were present, Camilla read the announcement twice, then she set it down, dismissed everyone from the room except her private secretary, and asked a single question. How is this possible? I submitted applications for that property in December. The secretary had no answer, so Camilla called the Balmoral Estate Management Office directly. And that's when she learnt the truth. The property had been removed from the estate's available holdings in 2017. Her applications had been noted, but were never actually under consideration because the land had already been allocated for nearly a decade while Camilla had been planning and strategising. The decision had already been made. The property was never available. Her entire Scottish initiative had been built on a foundation that didn't exist. According to the same sources, Camilla's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She didn't cry. She didn't retreat into quiet disappointment. She became furiously, visibly angry in a way her staff had rarely seen. They knew, she reportedly said, Anne knew Edward knew, and they let me waste years planning something that was never going to happen. Within the hour, she demanded to speak with King Charles. But Charles, at that moment, didn't know any more than she did, because he was still going through his own process of discovery. Remember, this brings us back to where we started. Charles in his study at 8:17 p.m. reading estate documents and realising for the first time that his mother had carved up Balmoral without telling him. February 11th, 2026, 9:45 p.m, Clarence House. The confrontation between Charles and Camilla, according to sources who were present in the building, was one of the most emotionally intense moments in their marriage. Camilla was furious not just about losing the property, but about what the loss represented. Years of planning, promises made to donors, a strategic vision for her legacy. All of it demolished in a single legal document she'd never been allowed to see. But more than that, she felt humiliated. Louise Windsor, a young woman with no formal royal role, had been given something Camilla desperately wanted, and the implication was impossible to miss. Queen Elizabeth had trusted Louise more than she trusted Camilla. "Your mother never accepted me," Camilla reportedly said to Charles, "and now even from the grave she's making sure everyone knows it." Charles, according to these sources, tried to defend his mother. He argued that this wasn't personal, that the Queen had always valued Louise's character, that this was about preserving a private sanctuary rather than making a statement about Camilla. But Camilla wasn't having it. She could have left it to William, to George, to Anne, to anyone in the direct line, but she chose a girl with no title and no duties, specifically because it wasn't me. And then she delivered an ultimatum that sources say shook Charles to his core. "I want you to contest this. I want you to challenge the legal transfer, and I want you to make them explain why I wasn't even consulted." Charles's response, according to sources, "I can't do that. The will is sealed, the transfer is complete, and Anne is executor. Even if I wanted to challenge it, I have no legal standing." "Then get standing," Camilla reportedly shot back. "You're the king. Act like it." That phrase, "act like it," reportedly wounded Charles deeply, because it touched on his greatest insecurity, that despite wearing the crown, he often felt powerless within his own family. The argument continued late into the night, and by the time it ended, according to sources, Camilla had made a decision. If Charles wouldn't fight for her, her family would. February 12th, 2026, morning. Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son, contacted a prominent London law firm specialising in estate disputes. According to legal sources, he inquired about the possibility of challenging the Little Balmoral transfer on procedural grounds. The specific question: could a sealed will provision executed in 2017 be contested based on lack of disclosure to interested parties who had made substantial investments in related planning? In other words, could Camilla sue for damages based on the fact that she'd spent time and resources planning the writer's heritage retreat without being informed that the property was already allocated? The legal response was swift and devastating. No. Private will provisions don't require disclosure to non-beneficiaries, and investing resources into plans for property you don't own does not create a legal claim to that property. But Tom Parker Bowles, according to sources, wasn't satisfied with that answer. He pushed the lawyers to find any angle, undue influence, procedural irregularities, anything that might create grounds for a challenge. The lawyers, reportedly uncomfortable with the direction this was taking, advised strongly against pursuing any legal action. It would be expensive, likely unsuccessful, and would create a massive public scandal that would damage the family far more than the property loss already had. But the Parker Bowles family, according to insiders, felt that their mother had been deliberately humiliated by the royal family, and they wanted some form of justice, or at least public acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong. That's when things escalated from private family conflict to potential public crisis, because on February 13th, a carefully worded letter was sent from Tom Parker Bowles' legal team to Princess Anne's office requesting clarification on procedural transparency regarding the 2017 estate provision. The letter didn't explicitly threaten legal action, but it asked pointed questions about when the provision had been executed, who had been informed, and whether proper disclosure protocols had been followed. Princess Anne's response, delivered within 24 hours, was a masterpiece of aristocratic dismissal. The single-page letter, according to sources who've seen it, acknowledged receipt of the inquiry and provided exactly one substantive paragraph. The estate provision in question was executed in accordance with all applicable legal requirements, with full consent of the testators and with proper documentation maintained by the relevant solicitors. As executor, I confirm that all procedures were followed correctly and that the transfer is final and non-negotiable. No further clarification will be provided. It was signed simply, Anne. The message was clear. Don't waste my time with veiled legal threats. This is done. But what Anna's letter didn't say, and what would only emerge later through palace sources, was that she was absolutely furious that the Parker Bowles family had attempted to intimidate her with legal inquiries. Because to Anne, this confirmed everything she'd always believed about Camilla, that she viewed the monarchy as something to be exploited rather than served. And Anne was about to make sure that perspective became very, very difficult to maintain. February 15th, 2026. Windsor Castle. According to multiple sources, Princess Anne requested a private meeting with King Charles, not at Clarence House where Camilla might overhear. At Windsor, in a small private sitting room, the meeting lasted 37 minutes. And while we don't have a transcript, sources on both sides have confirmed the general outline. Anne confronted Charles about the legal inquiry from Tom Parker Bowles. She made it clear that any attempt to challenge the will or harass Louise would be met with a comprehensive legal defence that would expose every detail of Camilla's Scottish retreat planning, including the donor connections, the private financial commitments, and the fact that she'd been making plans for property she had no right to. If they want to fight, Anne reportedly said, I will ensure the public understands exactly who was planning to take what wasn't theirs. Charles, according to sources, was devastated, not angry at Anne, but heartbroken that his family had reached this point, that his wife and his sister were on the verge of public warfare over his mother's estate. He reportedly asked Anne, can't we find some kind of compromise, something that allows Camilla to save face? Anne's response, as reported, Camilla's face is her problem, not mine. Louise has done nothing wrong. Your mother made a choice, and I will not allow that choice to be undermined by people who think inheritance is negotiable. The meeting ended with Charles understanding that he had no power to stop what was coming. Anne had the law on her side. She had public opinion on her side. Louise was already being portrayed sympathetically in media coverage. And she had the moral high ground of defending the Queen's explicit wishes. Charles was cornered, and there was nothing he could do. That evening, Charles had another difficult conversation, this time with Camilla. According to sources, he told her that there would be no legal challenge, that Tom needed to withdraw his inquiry immediately, that any further attempts to contest the inheritance would only make things worse. Camilla's response, as reported, was cold and final. Then your mother has won. Even from her grave, she's managed to remind me that I will never truly belong. The conversation ended there, and according to palace insiders, the relationship between Charles and Camilla entered a period of cold distance that would last for weeks. But while the adults were fighting their battles, something unexpected was happening in the public sphere. Because Lady Louise Windsor, the quiet young woman at the centre of this storm, was about to do something that would completely change the narrative. February 20th, 2026, Little Balmoral Manor. Lady Louise made her first public appearance at the property she'd inherited, not for a photo opportunity, not for a ceremonial ribbon cutting, but for a small private dedication of what she called the Quiet Years Initiative. The event was attended by local Scottish officials, historians, educators and archivists. No major media was invited, though one university partner in Aberdeen was allowed to live stream the remarks. Louise, dressed in a simple forest green coat, spoke for exactly 11 minutes, and what she said would become one of the most viral royal moments in years. The place I inherited is not a stage, she began. It is a stewardship, and I do not claim it by blood, but by trust, by the faith of a woman who led without noise and who served without demand. Then she addressed the elephant in the room. King Charles's offer of elevation to full royal status with an HRH title and official duties. I am grateful for my family's trust, Louise said, but I believe duty does not require a title. Not today, not for me, and not for what this house stands to protect. The silence in the room was absolute. Instead of accepting a title, Louise announced that Little Balmoral would become the headquarters of an independent educational trust. The Quiet Years Initiative would preserve royal archives, fund youth leadership programs, and support women in public service, all administered by a civilian board with Louise serving as honorary co-chair. This is not a museum, she emphasised. It is a promise that history, when guarded with care, can serve the future without spectacle. The speech was live-streamed to 9 million viewers within 48 hours. Social media exploded with reverent commentary. The phrase monarch of memory trended worldwide. And most devastatingly for Camilla, the public comparison was immediate and brutal. Louise's quiet dignity versus Camilla's grasping ambition. One widely shared tweet captured the mood. Louise inherited a fortune and immediately turned it into service. Camilla planned to claim property that wasn't hers and turn it into self-promotion. The difference is everything. February 22nd, 2026. In what many saw as a desperate attempt to regain narrative control, Queen Camilla's office announced a new exhibition, The Crown's Compassion, a life in modern royal service. The timing was disastrous. The exhibition focused on Camilla's charitable work and public service was immediately compared unfavourably to Louise's initiative. Media coverage was sparse. Senior royals, including Catherine and Anne, declined to attend. Most tellingly, King Charles delayed his appearance by a full day, citing an unscheduled health consultation. The exhibition was quietly closed within 2 weeks, citing renovation works at the venue. No farewell event was held, no final statements were made. It was, by any measure, a humiliating failure. But the final blow came not from public reaction, but from a private confrontation. February 25th, 2026, Windsor Castle Long Gallery. According to multiple witnesses, Queen Camilla approached Princess Anne during a charity event. What followed was brief, intense, and devastating. Camilla allegedly accused Anne of manipulating Louise into taking the spotlight and using the inheritance to humiliate her. Anne's response, delivered with her characteristic steel. If the spotlight finds her, Camilla, it's because the public sees what you're trying to hide. When Camilla retorted that Louise was never meant to be a working royal, Anne delivered the final blow. Neither were you. And yet here we are. Witnesses describe the silence that followed as funeral grade. Camilla left without another word and, according to palace sources, has avoided Anne completely ever since. March 2026, present day. As I record this, the situation remains unresolved. Charles is caught between his wife's wounded pride and his sister's institutional authority. Camilla has retreated from public engagements, her strategic vision in ruins. And the Parker Bowles family, while no longer threatening legal action, remains furious about what they see as deliberate humiliation by the royal family. Meanwhile, Lady Louise continues her work at Little Balmoral, quietly, without fanfare, without seeking credit or publicity. She's doing exactly what Queen Elizabeth trusted her to do, protecting a sanctuary, preserving a legacy, serving without spectacle. And in doing so, she's exposed a fundamental truth about the monarchy that many had forgotten. Titles don't grant legitimacy, service does. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And legacy isn't about what you claim, it's about what you protect when no one's watching. King Charles is devastated, not just because his mother kept secrets from him, but because those secrets revealed a truth he can't escape. Queen Elizabeth trusted Louise more than she trusted him and Camilla to protect what mattered most to her. Camilla's family is furious, not just because they lost a property, but because they lost the narrative. They can't claim they were wronged without admitting they were planning to take something that was never theirs. And Princess Anne, she's exactly where she wants to be, defending her mother's legacy with the same unflinching resolve that defined the Queen's reign. The inheritance of Little Balmoral wasn't just about land or money, it was about values, about what the monarchy is supposed to represent when the cameras aren't rolling and the crowds aren't watching. Lady Louise inherited a sanctuary, but what she's really protecting is something far more valuable, the memory of a queen who believed that greatness grows in silence. And that memory, carefully guarded in a quiet corner of the Scottish Highlands, may prove more enduring than any crown.